He was wrong. We read earlier in the chapter, David actually left them with another shepherd. But the point is, it shows us what that rule was. Under no circumstances would it be acceptable to leave the sheep by themselves. So rule number 2 is similar. A shepherd was expected to run towards danger if that's what was necessary to protect the sheep. A shepherd was expected to run towards danger to protect the sheep. Look at verse 40. 1 Samuel chapter 17 at verse 40, we know that David ended up taking Goliath down, and he does so using a slingshot. Verse 40 tells us that he reached into his shepherd's bag and had a slingshot. And you may be wondering, what in the world is he doing with a slingshot? But this is not a toy. It was in his shepherd's bag because it was used to protect the sheep. That if any animal, any one or specifically any wild animal came to challenge or to try to take off one of those sheep, it was the shepherd's duty, his obligation to try to fight that animal off. That's why in his shepherd's bag he carried a slingshot at all times. In fact, he tells a story earlier in the chapter when he's talking to King Saul, and he's trying to get Saul to authorize him to take on Goliath. In verse 34 and 35, he tells this story to the king about this one time back home when he was taking care of the sheep, that he was approached by, he says, either a lion or a bear, or maybe both. But he's taking care of a sheep, and this lion or bear or both approach the herd and try to carry one of them off. And David tells the king that he fought one of those that lion or bear or both, he fought them off in order to protect the sheep. And if I think for a second about what it means to be a shepherd in that circumstance, he's got to fight off a lion or bear to protect the sheep. That was his obligation. The story gets even stronger, though, as you see the specific language David uses there. It wasn't like there was a lion coming or there was a bear coming and he saw it coming, he pulled out his slingshot and he scared the bear away. No, that's not how the story goes. The story goes that the lion or the bear or both, they came, they got one of the sheep in their mouth, and they were already running away. Now stop for a second and think, now if you're in that scenario, you want to protect the sheep, sure, that's your job. But the lion got one. Not great, but I've still got all the others. But the story goes, as David tells King Saul, that after the lion or bear or both got the sheep, had it in its mouth, and was carrying it away, David said then he went after the lion or bear or both and took the sheep out of its mouth. That's how a shepherd was to look at the sheep. Run towards danger in order to protect the sheep in their difficult time. Rule number 3. For any shepherd who takes on that job, a shepherd was to see the sheep for what they really were, and that is both weak and helpless. Weak and helpless. That's how shepherds were to look at the sheep. There's twice in Scripture where we're told about a shepherd going out and finding a lost sheep and then bringing that sheep back to be with the other sheep. And what's interesting about both those instances is the way that the sheep is brought back. So let's say that you have this lost animal, you find it, and you've got a lot of others back at home, and you're bringing them back. Maybe tie a rope around it and lead it back. No, that's not how they were brought back in both of these instances. We read one of them in Luke chapter 15, in the parable of the lost sheep, when Jesus tells the story and the shepherd finds the one that had been lost to bring it back to the 99. What does he do? He puts it on his shoulders and carries it back. He doesn't lead it back. He carries it back because that sheep is weak and helpless on its own and can only be brought back in that particular way. Similarly, Isaiah tells a similar event. Isaiah chapter 40 at verse 11. Isaiah chapter 40 at verse 11. This time the shepherd is bringing back a lamb, a young sheep. And verse 11, how does he bring it back? He doesn't walk it back. It says he carries it back close to his heart because it's weak and it's not able to care for itself. Shepherd sees the sheep as weak and as helpless. And David gives us another example of this in 2 Samuel chapter 24 at verse 17. A part of what it means to look at the sheep and see them as weak and helpless is to know that you have an obligation to take responsibility for them. You, the shepherd, take responsibility for the sheep. David deals with this in chapter 24 at verse 17, where Israel is in trouble because they got some bad leadership. Things have gone poorly. And David realizes that there is a reckoning coming with the Lord because of the mistakes they have made. But he says this in verse 17. When David saw the angel who was striking down the people, he said to the Lord, I am the one who sinned and has done wrong. These are but sheep. What have they done? Let your hand fall upon me and my family. That's rule number 3. The shepherd looks at the sheep for what they are. They're weak and they're helpless, and if they get in trouble, sometimes the problem is that they haven't been led very well. And the shepherd would take responsibility for that. That obligation falls to him. Final, the 4th rule that the shepherd has to follow, of course, is that the shepherd's job never ends. Shepherd's job never ends. You'll hear this story told very much this time of year in Luke chapter 2, which tells the story of Jesus' birth. And you know how that story begins, Luke chapter 2, that these shepherds are out when they see this angel, and the angel tells them of the coming of the Lord, or the birth of the Lord. And Luke chapter 2 at verse 8, we're told several things in that verse, but also specifically what time these events took place, right there in the middle of the night. Well, that's because the shepherds had to work in the middle of the night, because the next lion or bear down the road is not going to stop at the end of the day. 24 hours, 7 days a week, the shepherd's job never, ever ends. The point I was trying to make, or was hoping to make this morning, is just simply this, that what we've read